The elevator shuddered to a halt with a groan, as if the building itself had sighed and given up. Liam Carter, toolbox in hand, glanced up from the flickering fuse panel, his calloused fingers pausing mid-motion. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, his hazel eyes glinting under the dim fluorescent light. "Do you always fix things that don't belong to you?" he asked, voice low and teasing. "Or is today just special?" The woman across from him didn't flinch, but her eyes, sharp, storm gray and unyielding, met his with a coolness that could freeze a summer day. "Do you always start conversations with attitude?" she shot back, her tone clipped. "Or am I just lucky today?" Victoria Hale, though she'd introduced herself as Veronica, stood like a statue carved from marble, her dark cashmere coat draped over her frame like armor. Her high-heeled boots barely touched by the city's grime, and a silk scarf that shimmered with quiet opulence screamed wealth, far too refined for the creaking service elevator of this Chelsea corner tenement. She glanced at her watch, a sleek silver band that caught the light, her third check in as many minutes. "Look," she snapped, "I have somewhere to be." Liam straightened, wiping his hands on his faded work jeans, the kind worn thin by nights spent scrubbing floors and days spent chasing dreams that never quite paid the bills. "I'd have guessed that," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that contrasted her frost. "But unless that watch of yours doubles as a crowbar, you're stuck with me until this old beast decides to play nice." Victoria sighed, her arms crossing tightly as she leaned against the mirrored wall, the elevator groaning faintly beneath her weight. Liam caught the flicker of unease in her eyes, a crack in her polished facade. "Don't worry," he said, his tone softening, steady as a lighthouse in a storm. "These things grumble when they're bored, not when they're about to give up." "Comforting," she muttered, her voice dry, but the faintest tremble betrayed her. Silence descended, thick and heavy, the kind that presses against the chest when two strangers from opposite worlds are trapped in a metal box, breathing the same stale air. Liam could feel it, the weight of their differences, her tailored elegance clashing with his worn-out flannel, her urgency against his quiet resilience. "You live here?" she asked finally, her gaze fixed somewhere past him, as if the question itself was an afterthought. "Nope." He adjusted a wire in the panel, his movements deliberate. "I clean here. Nights, weekends, and when this elevator gets cranky, I fix what I can." He paused, glancing at her. "You?" Her lips parted, then closed. "I'm just passing through," she said, the words vague, a locked door. Liam didn't push. "Name's Liam," he offered instead, his voice carrying the ease of someone used to breaking silences. She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Veronica," she said, and he knew it was a lie, not from her tone, but from the way her gaze darted away, like a secret slipping through her fingers. He let it slide. "Ever notice," he said, leaning back against the panel, "how elevators never break when you're alone?" "No," she replied, her voice cool as glass, "because I don't usually ride them with strangers." Liam chuckled, a low, warm sound that echoed faintly in the cramped space. "Life's full of firsts, Veronica." For a moment she looked at him, really looked, not the dismissive glance one spares a janitor or a passerby on a Chelsea street corner. Her eyes softened, as if brushing against a memory buried deep, a whisper of who she might have been before the world polished her edges to a shine. Then the lights flickered, and the elevator lurched with a bone-rattling jolt. Victoria's hand shot to the rail, her knuckles whitening. Liam moved without thinking, his hand steadying her elbow, a quiet anchor in the sudden chaos. "I told you it was cranky," he said softly, his voice a tether to calm. She didn't pull away immediately, her breath catching as their closeness registered, a fleeting moment where the walls between them thinned. Then, as if startled by her own vulnerability, she stepped back. "How long is this going to take?" Liam crouched by the panel again, exhaling slowly. "Could be 5 minutes. Could be 20. Depends on whether this building still believes in miracles." "You're not exactly inspiring confidence," she said, her tone sharp but laced with something softer now, like frost melting at dawn. "I'm not here to inspire," he replied, his eyes fixed on the wires. "Just to keep the lights on and the roof from caving in." Victoria tilted her head, studying him. Do you always talk in riddles? Only when I'm stuck with strangers who don't smile, he said, a playful edge to his words. Her lips twitched, a brief, involuntary huff of a laugh, so fleeting he might have missed it if he hadn't been watching. Don't get used to it, she warned. But the air felt lighter, the silence less oppressive. Liam reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small, paper-wrapped object. Her brow furrowed. Is that a granola bar? My daughter insists I carry one, he said, his voice softening with a warmth that seemed to fill the elevator. Says it's for elevator emergencies. He held it out to her, an offering as simple as it was sincere. Victoria stared at it like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve, her fingers hovering before taking it reluctantly. Their hands brushed, just a graze, and she pulled back as if the touch had sparked something electric. More silence followed, but it was different now, softer, like the quiet before a storm breaks. You have a daughter? She asked, turning the granola bar in her hands, her voice quieter, less guarded. Ella, 7, smart as a whip, loud as a siren, loves drawing elephants. Liam's face lit up, the lines around his eyes softening. She's joyful, keeps me grounded, keeps me from becoming someone I don't recognize. And her mom? Victoria's question was tentative, as if she sensed the weight behind it. Liam's gaze drifted, his eyes landing somewhere far beyond the elevator walls, a place heavy with memory. Gone. 3 years now. His voice was steady, but the words carried the ache of a wound that never fully heals. I'm sorry, she said, and for the first time her voice held no trace of frost. Thanks. He nodded, the moment hanging between them like a fragile thread. The elevator's hum grew louder, a mechanical heartbeat filling the silence. Victoria spoke again, her voice softer, almost confessional. You know, most people would have panicked by now. Liam glanced up, meeting her gaze. Yeah, well, life teaches you panic doesn't fix much, especially when you've got a kid counting on you. She nodded, a faint gesture, and for a fleeting second, the woman before him wasn't the untouchable CEO of Peak Pulse Solutions. She was just Victoria, a stranger who'd been bruised by life's sharp edges, her armor slipping to reveal a glimpse of someone real. The elevator jolted upward, lights flaring back to life. Liam grinned, a spark of triumph in his eyes. Looks like this old building found its miracle. Victoria blinked, startled. That actually worked. He shrugged, dusting off his hands. Sometimes you just need to be stuck long enough for something to shift. The doors slid open with a soft sigh, and Victoria stepped out, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. She paused, turning slightly. Thank you, she said, her voice low, for the granola bar. And the quiet. Liam nodded, his eyes warm, steady. Anytime, Veronica. She hesitated, then spoke without looking back. My name's not Veronica, but I'm not ready to tell you the real one yet. With that, she walked away, her silhouette disappearing down the hall, leaving Liam standing in the open elevator, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Something unspoken had begun, a fragile thread woven in a moment of shared stillness. Later, in the dim glow of their cramped apartment 4B, Liam stood at the chip kitchen counter, peeling an overripe banana into Ella's lunchbox. The radiator hissed in the corner, a reminder of bills piling up under her macaroni art on the fridge. Across the table, Ella sat cross-legged, her tongue poking out as she shaded the ears of a wobbly cartoon elephant on purple construction paper, her crayons scattered like tiny beacons of hope. Daddy, she said, her voice bright with the unfiltered curiosity of a 7-year-old, is it okay to give someone a drawing if you don't know their favorite color? Liam paused, the banana peel dangling in his hand. He looked at his daughter, her wide eyes sparkling with the kind of innocence that made the world feel softer, safer. Depends, Bug, he said, his voice gentle. Are you giving it to make them like you, or to make them smile? Ella tilted her head, thoughtful, her pencil hovering over the paper. To make them smile, she decided, her words carrying a quiet wisdom beyond her years. Then color it however you like, kiddo, Liam said, his heart swelling. That's more than enough. She beamed, folding the drawing with care, as if it were a treasure map to someone's heart, and tucked it into her backpack. Liam watched her, a small smile tugging at his lips. Mornings like this, quiet, simple, filled with Ella's light, were what kept him going, even when the weight of unpaid rent and endless shifts pressed against his shoulders. But as the radiator clanged to life, reality whispered its reminder. Something had to give, and soon. In the soft morning light filtering through the cracked window of apartment 4B, Liam Carter stood at the chip kitchen counter, peeling an overripe banana with a tenderness that belied his calloused hands. Across the table, Ella sat, her small frame hunched over a sheet of purple construction paper, her tongue peeking out as she shaded the ears of a wobbly cartoon elephant. The radiator hissed and coughed, a weary sentinel in their modest Chelsea corner home, where dreams clung to the walls alongside Ella's crayon art. "Daddy," she said, her voice a bright chime in the quiet, "is it okay to give someone a drawing if you don't know their favorite color?" Liam paused, the banana peel dangling like a fragile hope. He looked at his daughter, her eyes wide with the kind of innocence that could mend a broken world. "Depends, bug," he said, his voice warm, steady, like a hearth in winter. "Are you giving it to make them like you, or to make them smile?" Ella tilted her head, her pencil hovering, her 7-year-old mind wrestling with the weight of the question. "To make them smile," she decided, her words a small beacon of truth. "Then color it however your heart tells you, kiddo," Liam said, a smile breaking through the weight of unpaid bills taped beneath Ella's macaroni masterpiece on the fridge. "That's more than enough." Ella beamed, folding the drawing with the care of a cartographer crafting a treasure map, and tucked it into her backpack. Liam returned to the banana, his heart swelling with the quiet joy of mornings like this. Simple, soft, a fleeting refuge from the numbers that haunted him. Rent overdue, groceries barely covered, night shifts as a janitor stretching his bones thin. The radiator's clanging cough was a reminder. Reality was never far, tapping him on the shoulder like an unyielding creditor. As he zipped up Ella's coat and led her downstairs, the December air bit at his neck, sharp and unforgiving. Ella skipped beside him, humming a melody she'd spun from thin air, her joy a defiant spark against the gray morning. They reached the lobby when a voice, soft but certain, stopped them. "You dropped this." Liam turned. Victoria Hale stood there, holding Ella's wool mitten, her expression unreadable, yet softer than the day before. Gone was the cashmere coat and silk scarf. She wore a simple wool jacket, her face bare of makeup, her eyes carrying a vulnerability that made her seem less like a Wall Street titan and more like a neighbor on a Chelsea corner stoop. Ella's face lit up like a sunrise. "It's you, the elevator lady!" Victoria blinked, caught off guard, a flicker of warmth breaking through her guarded facade. Ella tugged at Liam's sleeve, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Can I give her the drawing now?" "Sure, bug," Liam said gently, his heart swelling as he watched his daughter unzip her backpack with reverent care. She pulled out the folded drawing and held it up like an offering to a weary traveler. "This is for you," she said, her voice earnest, "because you looked sad yesterday." Victoria took the paper slowly, her fingers hesitant, as if it might crumble under her touch. She unfolded it, revealing a wide purple elephant adorned with sparkles, its lopsided smile radiating a child's unfiltered joy. "I didn't know your favorite color," Ella added quickly, "so I made one up just for you." Victoria stared at the drawing, her storm gray eyes softening, a crack forming in the porcelain mask she'd worn so long. Something shifted, small perhaps, but seismic, like a memory long buried stirring to life. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if the words were a confession she hadn't meant to make. Ella grinned, undeterred by the weight of the moment. "Okay, bye. We're going to school now. Daddy says learning makes your brain do push-ups." Liam chuckled, the sound warm and grounding, and gave Victoria a polite nod. As he and Ella walked off down the street, the cold air seemed less biting, the world a little brighter. But Victoria stood frozen in the lobby, clutching the drawing like it was woven from something far more fragile than paper, her heart whispering a truth she wasn't ready to name. That evening, Liam trudged up the stairs to apartment 4B, a pizza box balanced in one hand, his knees aching from 12 hours in steel-toed boots. The weight of unpaid bills pressed heavier than the cold, each step a reminder of the life he was fighting to hold together. As he reached the third floor, he stopped. Victoria sat outside apartment 4B, her posture stiff, as if caught in the act of something she hadn't planned. She stood quickly, brushing off her jeans. "I wasn't waiting for you," she said, her voice defensive, almost flustered. Liam's lips quirked into a smirk. "Didn't say you were." She held up a small paper bag, its edges crumpled. "This was stuck in your mailbox downstairs. I thought it might get tossed." "Thanks," he said, taking it, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting moment. She didn't leave, her gaze lingering on his door, the paint peeling, the handle loose, the faded 4B barely clinging to the wood. "I live across the hall," she said suddenly, nodding toward the opposite door. "Moved in a week ago." "Fancy that," Liam said, raising a brow. "And yesterday—" She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something unguarded. "I don't usually get stuck in elevators with anyone, especially not people who offer granola bars and life advice." Liam leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his voice light but probing. "You didn't seem like someone who needed either." "That's the thing," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, raw and unguarded. "I didn't think I did either." He studied her for a long moment, seeing past the polished exterior to the woman beneath, someone running from a life that had caged her. "Can I ask something?" he said. She nodded, bracing herself. "Why here?" He gestured to the hall, the cracked plaster, the buzzing fluorescent lights, the faint scent of mildew. "People like you usually have penthouses, or at least working elevators." Victoria looked down, her fingers tightening around the paper bag. "Let's just say, I needed a place where people don't ask questions." Liam didn't press. He knew better than most that some stories were too heavy to share, their edges too sharp to touch. She shifted, suddenly awkward. "Anyway, I should—" "Vivian?" A voice cut through the hall, sharp and businesslike. A man in a crisp coat approached, his Bluetooth earpiece blinking like a warning light. "Meetings in 20, cars downstairs." Liam's eyes flicked to Victoria. Vivian. So Veronica had been a mask, a fleeting shield. She looked like she might explain, but Liam raised a hand, his voice steady. "You don't owe me anything." "No," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "But I might owe myself something." He gave a faint nod, a silent understanding passing between them. "We all do." Vivian glanced at him one last time, her heels clicking down the hall like the ticking of a clock she was trying to outrun. Liam watched her go, a quiet realization settling in his chest. Something had shifted, not just in the elevator, but in the space between them. Later that night, as Ella slept, her drawings taped to the wall like constellations of hope, Liam stood by the window, the city's pulse faint beyond the glass. Across the hall, the light under apartment 4B's door glowed softly. Not Veronica. Vivian. He couldn't shake the image of her holding Ella's drawing, her eyes tracing the purple elephant as if it held a secret she'd forgotten she needed. He whispered to the night, his breath fogging the glass. "Funny thing about broken elevators. Sometimes they carry you to places you never meant to go." Across the hall, Vivian sat on her couch, the purple elephant now taped to her fridge, the first decoration in a home that had felt like a hiding place. The drawing wasn't just a child's scribble, it was a mirror, reflecting a piece of her she'd buried under years of boardrooms and expectations. Just after 9, the power went out, a silent surrender of electricity that left the building hushed. The radiator hissed once, then fell silent. The fridge's hum faded. Only the soft glow of snow through the window remained, falling in thick, unhurried flakes. Liam lit a candle from a drawer, then another, the kitchen blooming into a warm amber glow. "Daddy?" Ella's voice came from the hallway, small but unafraid. "Why is it so dark?" "Power's out, bug," Liam said, scooping her into his arms, her warmth a shield against the cold. "But guess what? That means it's flashlight fort time." Ella gasped, her eyes wide with delight. "No way!" "Yes way," he grinned, carrying her to the living room. They draped a sheet over 2 chairs, crawling beneath with a flashlight and a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web. Ella nestled close, the cold forgotten in the warmth of stories and candlelight. But as Liam began the second chapter, a knock came at the door. Soft, hesitant, almost lost in the quiet. He frowned, brushing snow from his flannel shirt. How had it crept in? Opening the door, he found Vivian standing there. No makeup, no scarf, just a heavy gray sweater and jeans. Her expression nervous, vulnerable, a stranger to the polished CEO he'd met. "The hallway lights are out," she said quietly, "and the heat's gone. My apartment feels like a freezer." Liam stepped aside, his voice steady. "Come in." She hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not," he said, nodding toward Ella, who peeked from the fort. "We're building a fortress. It's kind of a team effort." Vivian's gaze softened as Ella beamed up at her. "You can help decorate it," Ella said, holding up a sheet of stickers. "I've got stars and hearts." Vivian's lips curved into a genuine smile, a rare crack in her armor. "I'd be honored," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that felt like a confession. Later, the three sat in the living room, blankets draped over their shoulders like cloaks of mismatched royalty. The candlelight danced across their faces, casting shadows that felt like secrets shared. "I never knew a blanket fort could feel like a palace," Vivian said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to break the spell. Liam poured hot water into 3 mismatched mugs, the last of his peppermint tea steeping in the quiet. "It's not about the blanket," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "It's about who's underneath it with you." In the flickering candlelight of apartment 4B, the air was thick with the warmth of shared silence, a fragile sanctuary against the snow-dusted Chelsea night. Victoria Hale sat wrapped in a blanket, her storm-gray eyes tracing the contours of Liam Carter's face as he poured the last of his peppermint tea into mismatched mugs. Ella, nestled beside her, sipped her tea with exaggerated care, her small fingers clutching the mug like a treasure. "Do you have a family, Miss Victoria?" she asked, her voice a soft chime, innocent yet piercing. Victoria's fingers tightened around her mug, the porcelain cool against her skin, as if bracing for a truth she'd long buried. "I had one," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A long time ago." Her eyes flickered, a shadow of loss passing behind them, too heavy for the room to hold. Liam watched her carefully, his gaze steady, reading the unspoken weight in her words. Ella, undeterred, nodded with the quiet wisdom of a child who'd already known grief. "Sometimes people go away," she said, her voice small but sure. "My mom did. But Daddy says love doesn't leave. It just changes clothes." Victoria's lips parted, her breath catching as if Ella's words had reached into her chest and tugged at something raw. "That's beautiful," she whispered, her voice trembling, a crack in the armor she'd worn for years. Liam's lips curved into a small, tender smile, his eyes softening with pride. "She's wise for 7. "She's luminous," Victoria murmured, her voice thick with emotion, as if naming a truth she'd forgotten how to recognize. They sat in the quiet, the snow falling thicker now, dusting the windows like powdered sugar, softening the edges of the world outside. Inside, time seemed to pause, a sacred stillness settling over them, as if something holy had slipped into the room, carried on the wings of a child's words. Then Ella yawned, a long, dramatic sound that broke the spell, her eyelids fluttering with the weight of sleep. "Someone's ready for bed," Liam said, his voice gentle, a lighthouse guiding her home. "I don't want to miss the snow," Ella murmured, her words slurring as her eyes drifted shut. "You won't," Liam whispered, lifting her gently into his arms, her small form curling against his chest as he carried her to her room. Victoria stood in the candlelit silence, her gaze drifting to the living room walls where Ella's crayon drawings, elephants, stars, a crooked rainbow labeled hope in bold, childlike scrawl, hung like badges of truth. When Liam returned, she was still staring, her fingers tracing the air as if to touch the drawings from afar. "You decorate with truth," she said, her voice soft, almost reverent. Liam tilted his head, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Your walls," she clarified, turning to him. "Most people hang what they want the world to see. You hang what's real." He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. We don't have much, but we've got honesty and love. Ella says those are the best decorations anyway. Victoria's smile was small but genuine, a rare glimpse of the woman beneath the CEO's armor. She's not wrong. He hesitated, then spoke, his voice low. You want to stay a while? Until the heat comes back? She blinked, the words stay hanging between them like a fragile bridge. Stay? I've got a sofa, he said, echoing her earlier words with a playful glint. It's lumpy, but honest. Victoria exhaled, a slow release of tension, her eyes searching his face. It's strange, she said softly. I have hotel rooms waiting for me, houses with smart thermostats and silent fridges, but none of them feel like this. Like home, she didn't say, but the word lingered in her silence. Liam said nothing, his presence steady, a quiet invitation. She moved to the sofa and sat, her posture softening, as if shedding a weight she'd carried too long. Do you believe in starting over? She asked, her voice barely audible, her gaze fixed on her hands. Liam leaned against the kitchen wall, his eyes steady. Only every day. She looked up, her eyes shining with something raw, unguarded. When I was 8, I used to build forts with my nanny in the garden. Blankets, pillows, a world just for us. My father, Charles Hale, said it was a waste of time, said I should be practicing piano or studying balance sheets. One day he took scissors to our bed sheets, cut them to shreds right in front of me, said he was cutting out the nonsense. Her voice wavered, the memory sharp as broken glass. I haven't built a fort since. Liam was quiet, letting her words settle, his heart aching for the child she'd been. You know what I think? He said finally. The bed sheets weren't the problem. It was that you were happy in something you built yourself, and he couldn't control that. Victoria stared at him, her breath catching, as if he'd seen straight through to the heart of her. Why do you say things like that? She asked, her voice trembling with wonder and pain. He met her gaze, unflinching. Because I've had my own sheets cut. They didn't speak for a while, the wind howling against the window, Ella's slow, peaceful breathing, a soft counterpoint in the distance. Then Liam spoke, almost to himself, his voice a quiet revelation. Funny, isn't it, how a broken elevator can lift people better than a working one ever could? Victoria let out a soft breath, a smile breaking through her guarded expression. That might be the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. He grinned, the candlelight catching the warmth in his eyes. Well, I've got good lighting tonight. Candlelight makes everyone sound wiser. She looked down at her mug, her voice barely a whisper. Liam, thank you, not just for the tea, for letting me be someone else, just for a little while. He didn't respond with words. Instead, he crossed to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small flashlight. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers, a fleeting connection that felt like a promise. What's this for? She asked, her voice soft, curious. In case the dark comes back, he said simply. She looked at him, and something shifted. Her gaze no longer saw a janitor or a single dad, but a steady presence, a lighthouse in a storm. She took the flashlight gently, and in the flickering hush of that snowbound room, Victoria realized she hadn't felt this safe in years. The snow had melted by morning, but the quiet it left behind lingered, heavy with possibility. Liam stood in the hallway, toolbox in one hand, key ring jangling in the other. The superintendent's call had come at 7 a.m. sharp. A pipe had burst in Unit 5B again. As always, the official maintenance crew was nowhere to be found, so Liam filled the gaps, his quiet labor a shield against a world that demanded more than he could give. Recognition, in his experience, came with a price he couldn't afford. As he passed the third-floor landing, a door clicked open. Victoria stepped out, a coffee mug cradled in her hands, her hair damp and curling softly at the ends, her face bare of the armor she'd worn in the elevator. Early bird, she said, her voice lighter than before. Liam turned, offering a tired smile. Pipe on 5B decided it wanted to be a fountain. She tilted her head, studying him. You're not the official guy, are you? Nope, he said, his voice steady. Just the unofficial everything. He started up the stairs, but her voice stopped him. Hey, About last night, he paused, turning to face her. I haven't felt that kind of quiet in a long time, she said, her eyes soft, unguarded. The kind that doesn't ask anything from you. Liam nodded, his heart warming at her words. Sometimes silence says the most. She smiled, a rare, genuine curve of her lips. You should put that on a t-shirt. He chuckled, turning to go, but not before adding, save some coffee for the rest of us. By mid-afternoon, Liam was back in apartment 4B, his shirt damp with pipe water, his patience worn thin. Ella, enjoying a rare day off school for teacher training, sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching with half-broken crayons. I drew you a bear today, she said, her voice bright, because you were grumpy this morning. Liam laughed, a low, warm sound that eased the ache in his bones. Grumpy bear, huh? What's he holding? She pointed proudly at the drawing. A wrench. He's fixing the sky. Liam looked at the drawing longer than he needed to, the simple lines of Ella's crayon bear stitching something broken back together in his chest. Thanks, Bug, he said softly. I needed that more than I thought. A knock came at the door, sharp and unexpected. Liam opened it, expecting a neighbor. Instead, a man in a tailored wool coat stood there, his practiced smile not quite reaching his eyes. Good afternoon, he said crisply. I'm looking for Victoria Hale. I was told she relocated to this building. Liam stiffened, his instincts flaring. And you are? Damian Wells, Executive Vice President, Peak Pulse Solutions, the man said, his tone polished but cold. May I? Sorry, wrong door, Liam said flatly, starting to close it. Victoria's voice cut through the hallway, calm but taut. Damian. The man turned, relief flickering across his face. There you are, thank God. Victoria approached, her posture steady but her eyes betraying a tremor of tension, her armor back in place, invisible but heavy. I didn't ask to be found, she said, her voice low, controlled. You're needed at headquarters, Damian pressed, his Bluetooth earpiece blinking like a warning. The press is all over the failed merger story. The board wants to know where you stand. Victoria shook her head, her jaw tight. I took a leave of absence. You can't just vanish, Victoria, he said, his voice sharp. You're not an intern. You're the face of Peak Pulse Solutions. She exhaled slowly, her eyes burning with quiet defiance. And what if I don't want to be? Damian blinked, caught off guard. What are you saying? I'm saying I need space, she said, her voice steady now, a blade honed by resolve. And you need to leave. He scoffed, his gaze flicking to the cracked walls of the hallway. You think hiding in a building with busted plumbing makes you invisible? Victoria didn't answer, her silence a wall he couldn't breach. Damian's eyes slid to Liam, a sneer curling his lips. So this is why you're here, playing house with the handyman. Liam stepped forward, not aggressive, but unyielding, his voice calm but firm. She's not hiding, she's healing. There's a difference. Damian's sneer deepened. Right. Must be nice rebuilding your soul with someone else's broken toolbox. Victoria's voice cut through, cold as the winter air. Leave, now. Damian opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. You'll regret this, he said, turning on his heel and disappearing down the hall. Victoria stood frozen, her breath uneven, the weight of the encounter pressing against her. She turned to Liam, her voice soft but raw. I'm sorry, he wasn't supposed to know. Liam leaned against the doorframe, his eyes steady, non-judgmental. We all have ghosts, some just wear nicer suits. She looked at him, and something broke, not violently, but quietly, like ice cracking under the weight of a long-held memory. You should know something, she said, her voice trembling with vulnerability. I didn't come here just to escape headlines. I came to remember who I was, before the world decided who I should be. Liam said nothing, letting her words settle, his silence a deep, unspoken understanding. That night, as he sat with Ella, her small hand resting on his chest as she drifted to sleep, the snow flurried outside, light as dust. The world felt fragile, but in that fragility, something new was taking root, a quiet hope, born in the space between a child's drawing and a stranger's courage. In the quiet hush of apartment 4B, Liam Carter tiptoed into the living room, the floorboards creaking softly under his weight. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows across the walls where Ella's elephant drawing once hung, a vibrant splash of purple now gone. In its place, a small folded note was taped neatly, its edges crisp against the peeling paint. Liam's breath caught as he opened it, expecting Ella's crooked handwriting. Instead, the words were in a precise, unfamiliar script, signed with a single V. I lied to you once, about my name, about who I was. But the truth is, I've never been more myself than when I was sitting in that blanket fort with you and Ella. Thank you for letting me be nobody for a little while. You have no idea how much that meant. V. Liam folded the note slowly, his fingers tracing its edges as if it held the weight of a confession. He crossed to the kitchen, opened a drawer marked Keep Forever in Ella's childish scrawl, and placed the note beside her drawings, a treasure trove of hope and memory. Stepping to the window, he gazed across the hall, where a soft glow spilled from beneath Victoria Hale's door. A half-smile curved his lips as he whispered to the night, his breath fogging the glass. Funny thing about names, sometimes you have to lose yours to find who you really are. Across the thin hallway, in the sparse solitude of apartment 4B, Victoria sat on the floor, her back against the couch, the world too quiet around her. She hadn't cried in years. Not when the merger at Peak Pulse Solutions collapsed. Not when her mother's calls stopped coming. Not even when her name trended for 3 days beside the word cold-hearted. But tonight, a 7-year-old's crayon letter had broken the dam. She'd found it slipped under her door, folded unevenly on sky-blue construction paper, Ella's handwriting sweet and crooked, the L in love towering over the rest. Dear Miss Victoria, you don't have to smile if you don't want to, but if your heart is tired, mine is strong enough to share. Love, Ella. Victoria stared at the words, her vision blurring as tears spilled, unbidden, down her cheeks. She collapsed. No grace, no ceremony, as if the strings holding her together had been cut. The letter wasn't eloquent, wasn't corporate, but its purity pierced her, a light through the cracks of a life she'd forgotten how to live. Her heart, so long exhausted, stirred with something new. Hope, raw and unpolished, offered by a child who saw her not as a CEO, but as a soul in need of mending. The next morning at 7:15 a.m., Liam opened his door to find Victoria standing there, a thermos of hot chocolate and a folded napkin in her hands. Ella, still in fuzzy pajamas, blinked up at her, rubbing sleep from her eyes. You're early, she said, her voice thick with morning. We don't wake up till Daddy turns on the radio. Victoria offered the thermos, a shy smile breaking through her usual reserve. Peace offering, she said. Ella squinted suspiciously, then took a sip, her face lighting up. It's real cocoa, not that powdered stuff. Liam appeared behind her, his shirt wrinkled, hair tousled from a night of restless dreams. What's going on? He asked, his eyes moving from Victoria to Ella. Victoria held out the napkin. Blueberry muffin. Bought, not baked. Just in case you're wondering. He looked from her to Ella, a question in his gaze. Everything okay? Victoria nodded, her voice soft but steady. I just wanted to say thank you for the letter. Ella tilted her head, her eyes bright with curiosity. Do you feel less tired now? Victoria knelt to her level, her smile trembling with emotion. You have no idea, she whispered, her voice catching on the truth. That afternoon, the Chelsea Corner neighborhood came alive with its annual winter block party, snowflakes falling like powdered sugar over folding tables, laden with plastic cups and steaming slow cookers. Liam stood by a battered propane heater, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, watching Ella negotiate a cookie swap with the finesse of a seasoned diplomat. Victoria appeared beside him, her presence quiet but undeniable, like a melody you only notice when it stops. She didn't speak at first, her breath visible in the cold air. When she did, her voice was low, confessional. I told my assistant to clear my schedule for 2 weeks. Liam raised an eyebrow, a spark of surprise in his eyes. Big move for a CEO. She smiled faintly, her gaze on the snow-dusted street. Feels smaller now, like finally making room to breathe. He nodded, his voice warm. Breathing's underrated. A pause settled between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Then she spoke, her tone carrying a weight that demanded his attention. "Can I tell you something?" Liam turned to her, sensing the gravity behind her words. "Go ahead." "When I was 16, she began, her voice soft but steady, "I wrote a letter to my father, Charles Hale. Told him I didn't want to take over Peak Pulse Solutions. I wanted to study marine biology." She laughed, a brittle sound that broke on the edges. "He called me ridiculous, said I was wasting my bloodline." Liam stayed quiet, his silence an invitation to continue. "2 years later," she said, her eyes distant, "he made me read a resignation letter to the board. Then he shredded it in front of me and said, 'Now you've had your rebellion. Go build your legacy.'" Her voice wavered, the memory a wound that hadn't healed. "And I did. But I lost my name in the process, my joy, my oxygen." She looked at Ella, chasing snowflakes with a paper cup, her laughter cutting through the cold. "Your daughter, she gave some of that back." Liam's voice was gentle, a tether to the present. "She's good at that. Tends to people like their gardens, even the ones they've given up watering." Victoria met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with vulnerability. "Do you believe people can change?" "I believe people don't change overnight," he said, his voice steady, "but they can choose differently, one choice at a time." "And do you think I could be someone different?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam held her gaze unflinching. "I think you already are." For a moment, there were no games, no armor, just two people standing in the snow, watching a child remind them what it meant to be human. That night, Ella slept soundly under a mountain of blankets, her cheeks pink from the cold. Liam stood at the sink, rinsing mugs, when a knock came at the door. He dried his hands and opened it to find Victoria, a folder clutched tightly in her hands. "I want to show you something," she said, her voice urgent. He stepped aside and she walked in, sitting at the table. She opened the folder, revealing a proposal, a software concept, smart and intuitive, designed to streamline healthcare and benefits for blue-collar families like his, living paycheck to paycheck. Liam froze, his breath catching. "This is your blueprint," she said, her voice steady. "Your notes, your handwriting." His voice was barely a whisper. "Where did you get this?" "I found it in your file drawer when I was looking for Ella's drawings," she admitted, her eyes searching his. "I didn't mean to pry, but, Liam, this could change lives." He stared at her, the weight of the past pressing against his chest. "That was from a long time ago, before everything." Victoria closed the folder gently, her gaze unwavering. "You still carry it." Liam exhaled, the sound heavy with years of buried dreams. "I stopped believing anyone would care. Or listen." "I'm listening now," she said, her voice fierce with conviction. "And I want to help." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the CEO, not the stranger from the elevator, but a woman offering him a chance to be seen, to be believed. "I don't need credit," he said, his voice low. Victoria leaned in, her eyes burning with purpose. "It's not about credit, Liam. It's about purpose. You built something beautiful. Let's bring it to life." His throat tightened, a flicker of fear surfacing. "What if it fails?" She didn't blink. "Then we fail trying to do something that matters, and that's a win in my book." Silence settled, thick with possibility. Liam reached for the folder, and in that moment, something long dormant inside him, a quiet, brave spark, flickered back to life. "You know the difference between a blueprint and a dream?" Victoria asked, her voice soft, like someone tracing an old scar. Liam didn't look up from the circuit board he was tinkering with, the kitchen table strewn with wires and napkins scrawled with notes. "What? One you can fold up and forget in a drawer? The other keeps waking you up at 3 a.m.? He tightened a screw, then met her eyes, a flicker of vulnerability in his gaze. "And what happens when the dream is what you've been trying to forget?" Victoria's lips parted, then closed, no answer forthcoming. Outside, the city moved in hushed rhythm, snowplows groaning, headlights sliding across brick walls, the soft hum of a world that never slept. Inside, the apartment was quiet, save for the whir of Liam's soldering iron and Ella's gentle breathing from the next room. For nearly a week, they'd worked like this, Late nights bent over wires, sketch pads layered with scribbles, resurrecting Liam's prototype, Bright Path, the dream he'd buried after his wife's death. With it, he was coming back to life too. Victoria offered more than funding. She brought insight, connections, vision, but more than that, she brought belief, not the cold ROI-driven kind, but the kind that said, I see you. This matters to you, so it matters to me. I looked you up, she said softly, breaking the silence. Liam set the tool down, wiping his hands. That's so. You were good, she said, her voice a whisper of admiration. Before you left the industry, people lined up for your work. He gave a dry laugh, the sound tinged with bitterness. Then I lined up outside a hospital billing office with a folder full of denial letters. Victoria's voice softened, almost a whisper. I'm sorry. Liam turned to her, his eyes shadowed with memory. You ever watch someone you love waste away? Not because medicine didn't exist, but because someone behind a desk decided they didn't check the right box? Her silence was answer enough, a shared grief in the quiet. That's when I stopped believing in systems, he said, his voice low, raw. So I tried building something for people who never got a seat at the table. Victoria nodded slowly, her eyes tracing his face. But when you lost her, I lost the will to fight, he finished, the words heavy, a confession he hadn't spoken in years. Victoria Hale's gaze met Liam Carter's, her storm gray eyes shimmering not with pity, but with a deeper recognition, a shared understanding of wounds that never fully heal. I know that feeling, she said, her voice soft, raw, like a confession whispered in the dark. I didn't lose someone, but I lost myself. Somewhere between board meetings and bottom lines, I became a version of me I didn't even recognize. Liam held her gaze, his heart stirring with the weight of her words. So why now? He asked, his voice steady but searching. Why come back to this? Victoria didn't blink, her eyes fierce with a newfound clarity. Because when Ella handed me that drawing, something inside me whispered, remember who you were before they told you who to be. Liam leaned back in his chair, the kitchen table strewn with wires and napkins scrawled with dreams. You think this system we're building, Bright Path, can do that for others? It's not just a product, she said, her voice alight with conviction. It's a mirror, and the right mirror can change everything. A few days later, Victoria led Liam into a quiet West Village cafe, where soft jazz wove through the air and waiters moved with unhurried grace. She'd arranged a meeting with a handful of trusted allies from the philanthropic arm of Peak Pulse Solutions. No press, no fanfare, just open minds ready to embrace something real. Liam arrived in a jacket too thin for the biting cold, but his eyes were steady, his back straight, carrying the quiet dignity of a man who'd fought battles no one saw. Victoria introduced him as the architect of a quiet revolution, her voice warm with pride. Liam blinked at the title, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, but he didn't argue. He opened his folder, spreading out the plans for Bright Path, and spoke in the only language he knew, honesty. His words weren't polished, but they carried the weight of lived truth. He spoke of single mothers forced to choose between medicine and rent, of veterans lost in mazes of paperwork, of janitors like himself whose families deserved dignity without drowning in bureaucracy. He didn't pitch. He shared, his voice steady, raw, a beacon cutting through the fog of corporate indifference. When he finished, the room fell silent. Not the silence of doubt, but the kind that settles when something undeniable has been spoken. One board member leaned forward, his voice thick with emotion. I haven't felt this in a long time. Victoria's smile was gentle, her eyes alight with purpose. That's because this wasn't a meeting. It was a beginning. That evening, back in the warmth of apartment 4B, Ella danced across the living room in mismatched socks, her laughter a melody against the hum of the radiator. I drew a new logo for your project, she announced, her voice bursting with pride as she held up a page. A stick figure in a superhero cape stood beside a laptop, a bright red heart glowing on its screen. It's called Heart Grid, she beamed, because your heart's in it and it helps people. Liam laughed, a rare, full-chested laugh that shook the weight from his shoulders. We might need to workshop the name, kiddo. Victoria took the drawing, her fingers tracing the crayon lines with reverence. Or maybe we don't, she said softly, her eyes meeting his. Liam leaned against the wall watching her. You think the world's ready for this? She looked back, her gaze steady, unwavering. The world's never ready for change, but that's never stopped it from happening. He studied her, seeing the shift in her, something softer, truer, emerging from the cracks of her polished facade. You've changed, he said quietly. Victoria's smile was vulnerable, a rare glimpse of the woman beneath the CEO. No, I think I've just come home to the person I was meant to be. She stepped closer, stopping just a foot away, her voice dropping to a whisper. You know what's funny? When I first met you, I thought you were stuck, a man who never climbed out. But now I see you weren't stuck at all. Her voice dipped, soft and certain. You were anchored to something real, and I was the one floating. A moment hung between them, filled with breath and understanding, a quiet bridge spanning their worlds. Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. Maybe we're both learning to breathe again. Victoria's eyes shimmered, a spark of hope igniting within them. Maybe we're not so different after all. In the gentle hush of that small apartment, surrounded by crayon dreams and broken things made whole, two souls realized they were no longer walking alone. But the quiet was shattered days later when Ella's voice cut through the stillness of the kitchen, her spoon swirling through a bowl of alphabet soup. Why would someone try to ruin something that helps people? Her question hung heavy, innocent yet piercing, oblivious to the storm it stirred. Liam didn't answer immediately, his hand resting on a manila folder, the other clenched around a coffee mug long gone cold. Across the room, Victoria looked up from the couch, her laptop open but ignored, her expression a practiced mask. But her eyes betrayed her. Behind the steel, something burned, fierce and unyielding. Because not everyone wins when people stop struggling, Liam said finally, his voice low, weighted with the truth of a man who'd seen the world's sharp edges. It had started 3 days earlier. BrightPath, their fledgling platform, had entered private testing, its interface a lifeline for a small group of families and social workers. The feedback was overwhelming. People cried on Zoom calls, their voices breaking with gratitude. A woman in Detroit said it helped her secure benefits denied for 3 years. A man called it a compass for those lost in paperwork's labyrinth. But good news travels slow, while sabotage moves like wildfire. That morning, Victoria's assistant called, her voice trembling with panic. Victoria, someone leaked the prototype. It's all over an anonymous tech forum. Source code, screenshots, internal docs. Victoria felt a chill, not from the winter air, but from a betrayal that seeped into her bones like ink. Who? She asked, her pulse dropping. A pause, then the answer. The access trace points back to Damien Wells. Of course it was Damien, her father's protege, the executive VP of Peak Pulse Solutions, who'd made it his mission to keep her in line, or out of the picture. Liam, upon hearing the news, had said only one thing, his voice steady as stone. So we build it again, better together. But Victoria knew the real danger wasn't the leak. It was what would come next. She was right. By afternoon, 3 board members had called, their voices laced with doubt. By evening, 2 investor meetings were canceled. By morning, a headline screamed from a major business news site, "Is Peak Pulse's Golden Girl sabotaging her own company for a pet project?" Victoria sat on the edge of the sofa, her fingers tight around her phone, the weight of the words pressing against her chest. Ella colored in her room, oblivious to the storm. Liam paced the living room, his steps heavy, trying to keep Victoria's silence from filling the space. I can handle a headline, he said finally, his voice firm. I can handle the leak, but I can't handle watching you get buried for doing the right thing. Victoria looked up, her voice hoarse but steady. You think this is the first time someone's tried to bury me? No, Liam said, his eyes burning with resolve. But I want it to be the last. Her smile was faint, fragile. I spent years as the daughter they paraded in front of cameras, while men like Damien made the real decisions. When I finally said no, they smiled and waited. Waited for me to stumble. Liam stepped closer, his presence a quiet anchor. Then let them see you stand. She met his gaze, her eyes fierce with determination. They won't come after me directly. They'll come after you. This was your idea, your code. Your name will be the one dragged. Liam's voice was soft, unshaken. I've lived most of my life in the shadows. If I have to take a bullet for something that matters, at least this time it won't be for nothing. Her throat caught, her whisper barely audible. You're not just building something to help others. You're teaching me how to be brave without being cold. He stepped closer, his voice low, warm. And you're teaching me to hope again without feeling foolish. Quietly, Victoria opened her laptop, her fingers steady despite the storm within. I have one shot to shift the story, she said. The annual investor forum is tomorrow. Damien will be there. The board, the press. It's the one place they can't cut my mic. Liam frowned, concern flickering in his eyes. You're going public. She nodded, her jaw set. I'm going to show them what BrightPath really is. Not in code, in impact. And if they vote you out? Her smile was faint but fierce. Then I walk out holding something they can't buy back. Liam reached for her hand, his touch a quiet vow. Then I'll be there. Not in the back, not in the shadows, right beside you. She squeezed his fingers, her eyes softening. You always know the right thing to say. I've been practicing, he murmured, a half-smile breaking through. Every time you leave the room. The next day, the investor forum buzzed with camera flashes and curated charm. Victoria stepped onto the stage in a simple charcoal blazer. No jewelry, no fanfare, just a woman carrying a truth too big to contain. Behind her, a screen lit up with faces, dozens of them. A single mom in Alabama, a retired vet in Montana, a bakery worker in Queens, each holding a handwritten sign, BrightPath helped me find help. I wasn't invisible anymore. Finally, a system that sees me. Victoria took a breath, her voice steady, not from a teleprompter, but from her soul. I stand here not as a CEO, but as someone who forgot what it meant to care beyond quarterly growth. I was taught impact is measured in numbers, but I've learned it's measured in faces, in dignity restored. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. The man who built this, the man they want to erase, is a single father who gave up on the system because it gave up on him. But he didn't stay down. He rebuilt it, and I had the privilege of helping him carry it into the light. Cameras flashed, their light a stark contrast to the fire in her words. Somewhere in the crowd, Damien Wells stood frozen, his calculated smile faltering. Victoria's eyes found him, unflinching. You want a scandal? She said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Here it is. We chose kindness over profit, and I'd do it again. The room fell silent, a hush that held the weight of truth. The silence in the investor forum broke with a single clap, tentative at first like a spark in the dark. Then another joined and another until the room erupted into a wave of applause, not for numbers or profit, but for meaning, for the quiet revolution Victoria Hale had laid bare. The faces on the screen, ordinary people given voice by BrightPath, seemed to glow brighter, their handwritten signs a testament to dignity reclaimed. In that moment, the room stood not for corporate gain, but for something deeper, something human. Back in the warmth of apartment 4B, Liam Carter tucked Ella into bed, her small hand gripping his a little tighter than usual, as if sensing the weight of the day. Her eyes, heavy with sleep, sparkled with curiosity. Daddy, she murmured, you and Miss Victoria, are you heroes now? Liam smiled, his voice soft as he brushed a curl from her forehead. No bug, he said, his heart swelling with quiet pride, but we're finally doing something worth being remembered for. Somewhere in the heart of the city, in a system that had long forgotten how to feel, a seed of change was quietly blooming, its roots nourished by courage and connection. But on a cold Wednesday, that seed faced its first frost. An email landed in Victoria's inbox with the subject line, Reorganization Plan, Immediate Implementation, its words as sterile as the corporate machine that birthed them. By noon, the Halcyon Room's access cards were revoked. BrightPath suspended under the guise of internal restructuring. Legal had stepped in, Servers locked down. Clara Evans's badge flashed red at the scanner, her face paling as her access was denied. Another colleague's files vanished mid-backup, and a third stared at a frozen interface, betrayed by the system they'd trusted. Liam wasn't even told. His name simply disappeared from the internal directory, erased like a smudge on a whiteboard. Victoria stormed into the downtown office tower at 4:13 p.m., her heels echoing like a countdown to war. She bypassed the receptionist, ignored the elevator, and took the stairs two at a time, her breath sharp with fury. In the boardroom, her father, Charles Hale, waited, his gray suit and blue tie immaculate, his calm smile a mask of control mistaken for morality. "I assume you've read the memo," he said, his voice smooth as glass. Victoria dropped a folder onto the glass table, the sound sharp, defiant. "You shut down Brightpath without a vote." Charles clasped his hands unruffled. "We didn't shut it down. We're repositioning. The board agreed it was a distraction." She leaned in, her voice low, burning. "A distraction from what? Actually helping people?" Her father tilted his head, his tone patronizingly even. "This company doesn't run on sentiment, Victoria. It runs on structure, shareholder value, legal risk assessments. And frankly, you've blurred the line between heart and business one too many times." Victoria's knuckles whitened against the folder, her voice trembling with restrained rage. "You saw the response at the forum, the impact. People believe in this." He didn't blink. "You built momentum off pity. That's not sustainable." She stared at him, as if he'd spoken a language she no longer understood. "That wasn't pity," she said, her voice rising, fierce. "That was dignity rediscovered. That was purpose." Charles rose, crossing to the window, his back to her. "Your mother once said you were too much fire for a house of glass. She was right. You keep throwing yourself at causes you can't control." Victoria's voice dropped, a quiet blade of truth. "Maybe the problem isn't the fire. Maybe the house was always too fragile to hold a real soul." He turned, his eyes cold, final. "You've made your choice, Victoria. So have we." That night, Liam sat at the small kitchen table in apartment 4B, staring at a laptop screen that mocked him with access denied. He closed it, leaning back in the chair, the dim glow of the stove light casting long shadows across the room. Ella slept soundly, curled under two blankets with her sock monkey hugged tight, unaware of the storm that had swept through their dreams. Victoria entered, her bag set down with a slow, deliberate weight. She didn't need to speak. Her silence carried the headline of defeat. "They shut it down," Liam said, his voice flat, a question that already knew the answer. She nodded, her eyes heavy with unspoken grief. "Everything." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the weight of failure pressing against his chest. "I should have seen this coming." Victoria shook her head, her voice firm despite the ache. "This isn't your fault." "They're right, though," he muttered, his gaze distant. "I don't belong in that world. I never did. They were just waiting for an excuse." Victoria crossed the room and knelt before him, her eyes fierce with conviction. "No," she said, her voice a lifeline. "They weren't threatened by your flaws, Liam. They were threatened by your clarity. You built something real, something that made people feel seen. They don't know what to do with that." He looked at her, a flicker of anger, disappointment, and grief rising in his chest. "I spent years afraid to dream again," he said, his voice raw. "And the one time I do—" She placed a hand on his, her touch steady, grounding. "They can cut the wires, but they can't kill the current. You hear me?" He didn't answer, so she pressed on, softer now, her voice a whisper of hope. "You told me once you stopped believing in systems, but this wasn't a system. This was you, what you carried, what you fought for, even when no one was looking." Liam looked down at their hands, then back up, a spark of resolve igniting in his eyes. "And now what?" Victoria stood slowly, her voice steady, fierce. "Now we get louder." The next morning, Liam opened his door to find a package. No return address, just his name scrawled in thick black marker. Inside was a flash drive. He plugged it into an offline laptop, his breath tight in his chest. What loaded was a miracle, a full backup of Brightpath's architecture. Design, back end, every revision, every note. A small post-it on the last file read, "Not everyone in the building forgot who they work for." Liam called Victoria, his voice urgent. "We have the whole build. Someone copied it before they locked us out." She answered on the first ring, her voice unwavering. "Then we finish what we started." He paused, doubt creeping in. But how? No investors, no resources, no legal backing. Her response was calm, fierce, a fire rekindled. "We don't need a company, we need a community." 3 days later, in a dimly lit Chelsea Corner Community Center, they hosted the first BrightPath Underground session. 20 folding chairs, 2 borrowed projectors, and free coffee in styrofoam cups welcomed over 40 people. Single parents, veterans, teachers, a grandmother clutching a duct-tape tablet. Liam stood at the front, his fingers fidgeting, nerves humming beneath his steady exterior. Victoria leaned close, her whisper a quiet anchor. "You don't need a podium, just be you." He nodded, stepping forward, his voice steady but raw. "This started with a drawing my daughter made, a heart inside a laptop. She called it Heart Grid." He paused, a smile breaking through. I laughed, but she was right. That's what we're building. A network for hearts too tired to keep knocking on locked doors. He looked around the room, meeting every gaze. "You're not invisible, not here. Not anymore." The applause was soft, honest, a ripple of hope louder than any headline. Outside, the winter wind bit sharp against the night, but Victoria stood beside Liam, watching the group scatter, their hands full of guides and USBs, promises of a better tomorrow. Liam glanced sideways, his voice low. "You still think we can win this?" Victoria's eyes glistened, her smile fierce with defiance. "We don't need to win. We just need to outlast the lie." He turned to her, curiosity sparking. "And what lie is that?" "That people like you don't matter," she said, pulling Ella's superhero drawing from her pocket. The laptop, the heart, the cape. "Turns out your daughter wasn't wrong." Together, under a flickering streetlight, with the world still trying to dim their spark, they carried a flame, small, stubborn, defiant. It was enough to begin again. The snow came fast that night, a furious wall of white against the city's glass and steel, but their fire burned brighter. The scent of rosemary and garlic wove through the modest kitchen, a warm melody against the winter chill seeping through the windows of their new suburban home. Victoria Hale, no longer the polished CEO of Peak Pulse Solutions, but a woman rediscovering her soul, sat at the corner of the table, reading a picture book aloud. Her voice, low and warm, carried a tenderness that felt like home. "And the little star said, 'Even the smallest light can find its way through the dark,'" she read, glancing up at Ella, whose beaming smile lit the room brighter than any chandelier. This wasn't a palace or a penthouse, not a boardroom gleaming with glass and power. It was better. It was theirs. A sanctuary built from mismatched furniture, a single working heater, and a fireplace they hadn't yet mastered. Its foundation wasn't concrete or steel, but something stronger. Nights spent drafting code on the floor, mornings packing school lunches and mending the world in equal measure. 2 weeks earlier, they had launched BrightPath 2.0, now fully independent, funded not by venture capital, but by the hearts of teachers, nurses, bus drivers, and countless others who believed in its mission. Over 500,000 users joined in the first week, each thank you message, each photo of a family reunited, each caseworker finally able to help. A small lantern lit in a world too long dimmed. Dinner unfolded slowly, time no longer an enemy, but a gentle companion. Ella, her cheeks flushed from the warmth, paused between bites of stew. "Do you think Mom would have liked this?" she asked, her voice soft with memory. Liam smiled, a soft, sad curve of his lips, his heart catching on the past. "She'd have said it needed more salt," he said, his voice warm with love and loss. "But then she'd have eaten 3 bowls." Victoria reached over, her hand resting gently on his, a quiet gesture that spoke louder than words. The silences between them no longer stung. They made room, a space for healing, for hope. After the dishes were stacked and leftovers tucked away, Ella pulled a small wooden box from under the couch, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I made something, she announced, grinning as she set the box on the table and opened it. Inside was a carved sign, painted in soft blue and white, a little crooked, a little uneven, but perfect. Welcome to Heart Grid House. Victoria blinked, her breath catching. You named the house? Ella nodded proudly, her voice bright. It's where all the hearts live now. Liam looked at her, then at the sign, a tightness in his chest. Not of pain, but of the overwhelming realization that they'd arrived somewhere sacred, despite a map that never made sense. He knelt beside her, his voice thick with emotion. You know what, kiddo? This might be the most important thing anyone's ever built here. Ella giggled, her laughter a chime in the quiet. Even more important than the internet? Especially more important than the internet, Liam said, his grin matching hers. That night, as the fire crackled low, its embers casting a soft glow, Liam stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath his boots. The stars above Chelsea Corner were sharp and clear, a canvas of light against the winter sky. Victoria joined him, slipping her hand into his coat pocket, her touch a quiet anchor in the cold. I used to think love was a weakness, she said, her voice soft, confessional. Something that blurred your vision, made you soft. Liam looked at her, his eyes steady, warm. And now? Her smile was radiant, her gaze lifting to the stars. Now I think it's the only thing that made me see. A pause settled between them, the kind that holds a lifetime of unspoken truths. Do you remember what you said to me that night, when everything was falling apart? She asked, her eyes shining in the cold. I said a lot of things, Liam teased, a half-smile playing on his lips. She laughed, a soft, unguarded sound. No, the one that stuck. You said we don't have to win. We just have to outlast the lie. He nodded, his voice low. Still believe it? Well, she whispered, her breath visible in the frosty air. We did. And then we built something in its place. They stood side by side, watching their breath vanish into the night, a quiet moment of shared victory. Then Ella's voice floated from the doorway, bright and insistent. Daddy, you forgot the best part. They turned to see her holding up a worn piece of paper, her original drawing, the superhero, the laptop, the heart. I never finished it, she said shyly, flipping it to reveal a new figure sketched in crayon beside the hero, holding hands, smiling. Victoria. Now it's complete, Ella said, her voice brimming with pride. Liam looked at the drawing, then at the two women who had unknowingly rebuilt his soul. He wrapped them both in his arms, the cold forgotten in the warmth of their embrace. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man who had lost everything. He felt like a man who had finally come home. In that quiet house with its mismatched furniture and hearts bigger than its walls, Christmas arrived not with grand gestures or polished ornaments, but with laughter, stew, and a sign carved by a little girl who still believed in superheroes. The most extraordinary stories don't unfold in boardrooms or battlefields. They bloom at kitchen tables, around steaming soup pots and open laptops, between people brave enough to believe again. This story, this real story, didn't end on a screen or in a file. It lived on in every letter sent, every heart helped, every child who looked at the world and whispered, what if we could fix it? And someone who finally said back, we can. If this story stirred something deep within you, if it reminded you that goodness still thrives in the quiet corners of everyday life, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you reading from? Share your city or country. It means the world to know how far these stories reach. If you believe in tales that heal, that uplift and reconnect us to our shared humanity, consider joining our journey. There's so much more to come, and we'd be honored to share it with you. From our little storytelling corner to your heart, thank you for being here.